Hello and welcome. Tonight for you, I have a compilation of Skinwalker and Cryptid stories. For those of you who don't know, a Skinwalker is a Navajo legend that is said to mimic voices of people and animals, but with an unnatural twist. It is also said that they shapeshift into animals, and sometimes, if you're really unlucky, people. Now, with the Skinwalker introduced, why don't we go ahead and jump into these stories, shall we? Story 1. I think I saw one as a child by theputzulu. I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot when I was younger. They owned a 40 to 50 acre farm with their house about a quarter mile into the woods. It was summertime. We were all going to bed, but I always had trouble falling asleep and was the only one awake at the time. I was returning from the bathroom to join my cousin, who was in the top bunk, and I in the bottom bunk. The bedroom had one window, which faced a light post my grandparents had installed some time ago. I was just beginning to cover myself up when I saw something cast a shadow against the window curtain. Once, then twice. It was fast, but I could tell there was something moving outside. I crawled out of bed, hugging the floor, already scared. I was about a foot from the closed curtain with my eye just above the windowsill. I stared out and nothing, at least for a few seconds. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a figure cast a shadow onto the curtain. It was shaped like a big-headed dog, complete with a long snout, a tail, and pointed ears. It stopped perfectly center of the window frame, then slowly turned its head to face me. I froze, but it then raised up a few inches to show its shoulders. I can only describe it as a wolf head on a human body. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it turned away and rapidly shuffled out of view. Anyone I've ever told this story to says that I was just young and it was only a nightmare. It wasn't. I remember it vividly, as if it were yesterday. I forgot to mention that this window was about 5 feet up from the ground. It was my mother's old room as a child, and when I asked her if she ever saw anything, she paused for a few seconds. She began to speak, but shook her head and stuttered out a no. She knew what I had seen, and refused to speak. But I know why she refused, for I saw it too. Story 2. An odd figure silhouetted against the sky. Western Idaho. By HillsidePloop. So, this is a story that comes from a very, very close family friend of my grandpa's. His name is Neil, and he's the kind of person that wouldn't lie about something like this. Honestly, I believe his story. This story was told while I was on a hunting trip with my grandpa, father, and a few of my uncles, Neil, and 1 or 2 other people. I don't know exactly how the conversation led to talking about strange and unknown things seen in the wild, but there we were. This was a few years ago, so forgive me if I've forgotten some details. Neil's story goes as follows. A few years back, he described it to be about early 90s, myself and one of my friends had gotten permission to go and hunt jackrabbits on another one of my friend's properties out in a very remote part of western Idaho. The property was out in the middle of the desert, quite far from any small town or city. We entered on the north side of the property over a cattle guard and through a gate. The property was sort of in this valley and was divided into a very large flat plain, mostly on one half of it, and then on the other half was a very large hill that spanned the length of the private land. The hill probably had an elevation of 200 to 300 feet, give or take. That night, we had been working the flatter part of the land with a spotlight on my truck and flashlights in hand, all while shooting rabbits. It was a clear night, and the moon was probably 3/4 full, so it was relatively easy to see some elements of the property by moonlight. We started a little after dusk, and by this time it was about midnight. We were about 2/3 down the length of the property when we heard this inhuman, blood-curdling scream coming from the eastern side where the hill ran. I looked at my friend and we both froze. We were probably 200 to 300 yards from the base of the hill, so the top of the hill had to be another 100 yards or so. As I started to scan the hillside with my scope, the creature had screamed again. I then followed the sound and saw a tall, lanky humanoid figure standing with the upper half of its body silhouetted against the sky at the top of the hill. I had fired a shot toward it from my .22, knowing it wouldn't make it to the creature, but I wanted to try and get it to move up over the hill so I could get a better look at it. But instead, this thing started to move down the hill toward us. As soon as it began to move toward us, we booked it to the closest side of the property, found a gate, shot the lock off, and drove away from there as fast as we could. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but it scared the shit out of me. So, there's Neil's story to the best of my recollection. Maybe it was a skinwalker or a wendigo. Based on his story, I'm not sure, but it's really got me thinking. Story 3. What was this thing? By Ghost Knife 0. Okay, so I live in Australia. I don't know where to post this, but I figured that if anyone were to have any idea, then you guys probably would. If it makes any difference, I was born in the US and have family there. I moved here when I was a baby. Supposedly I have Native American bloodline from the Seneca tribe. Currently, it's autumn, and where I live is in the outskirts of a major city, but still in the suburbs. This happened today in the late afternoon when I went to hang some washing on the line under our carport, attached to the side of the house. We were starting to lose daylight fast, so I thought I'd quickly pop out and hang up the last of the washing for the day. It was increasingly getting darker by the minute. I had just begun hanging clothes when I started to get an uneasy feeling. I'm not sure why, but I brushed it off as I was losing daylight quickly. A minute later, I heard a group of kids up the other end of the street screaming, and then silence. Again, I brushed it off as the kids were just being kids and playing with each other. However, the intensity of unease grew and I felt like I was being watched. I then heard a low growl which was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The air had gotten significantly colder and all the crickets and bugs went silent. I moved the clothes rack to outside the carport so I could use what little light there was to hurry this up as much as possible. In between hanging up pieces of clothing, I was scanning around me when I noticed something new. There was this dense garden that wrapped around our U-shaped drive that looked poor, like it had been trampled in a decent section. About 13 feet of the garden had been trampled. I intensely felt I was really being watched by something, and right before finishing the clothes, the feeling started to ease off just a little, and it began to warm back up, like when I was initially outside. I was raised with big dogs, Rottweilers, German Shepherds, etc., and I grew up in rural countryside. I've heard all kinds of animal sounds from wild dogs, foxes, koalas, possums, and bats. I've never in my life heard a growl like this before, and I don't know how to explain it, but it didn't sound natural. If I had to compare it to something, it was akin to a dog, but it was wrong somehow. One last thing to note. Before going outside, my cat desperately wanted out. Once I came back inside, she was acting completely different. She was skulking around and her fur was all puffed up. She also began following me around the house at my ankles, which was abnormal for her. I'm not exactly sure what was out there, but whatever it is, I hope it doesn't come back. Story 4. Creatures from a Northern Reservation by hbsc. The nighttime brought 2 rules we had to live by. No matter what family you come from, you were not to look outside or be outside. One night brought my brother to sneak out to meet a girl who lived nearby. Teenage stuff if you catch my drift. Fast forward to the later hours of the night, and he's sneaking back through his window. As he's getting ready to pull himself in from the absolute darkness of the night, he heard my dog growling a few feet behind him. The dog we had at the time was a highly aggressive and territorial breed, but to hear him growling came as a surprise to my brother. He claimed to call out softly to the dog, but the dog was unresponsive. After a few seconds, my brother slowly began walking toward the dog, and as he got closer, the smallest glint of light hit the dog's face. As his face softly lit, my brother realized that the dog was not looking at him, but the area of roof right above his bedroom window. As he slowly turned and looked at the empty space, he began to recognize that heart-sinking feeling of being watched, along with the sounds of something sitting as though something had perched itself at the edge of the roof. The more time went by, the more dread he felt. He was so scared that he rushed through his window and to our mother, panicking and telling her what he did and even what was going on. She was so scared she wasn't even bothered by the fact he snuck out. I remember watching and listening from my bedroom door and seeing her turn pale and begin to shake. She told him to never do it again and to keep his window closed. It was from that moment on forward that not only our neighbors, but people from the complete opposite side of the community began opening up about their experiences with the thing that walks among the roofs at night. One of which includes a close relative, who was home alone with an aunt one night. She claimed to begin hearing something clawing and walking on the roof. When she noticed it, she said it was like it noticed her, or knew she was there, because when she tried to find a room to shield herself in, the footsteps followed right above. Think if your ceiling was made of glass, and this being always knows exactly where your foot is falling, and the exact moment you extend your foot out for another step. It wasn't until I reached my 20s that I would personally begin experiencing this creature on a weekly, yes, I said weekly, and I'm not exaggerating, basis. It was like clockwork once the snow began to fall. Heavy footsteps before the sun was up that woke me around 5 a.m. at least once a week. Here and there, the footsteps would switch between what I only imagine is a grown man in steel-toed boots running, a small infant doing its best to crawl as fast as its tiny body would let it, or footsteps with what sounds like chains dragging. I was so desperate for sleep and to not be bothered that I started putting holy water on my ceiling weekly, but it seemed to only hold off whatever this being was for a few days before coming back again. As time went on, not only my next door neighbors but the residents who lived several houses down would tell me and my family about their experiences with the thing that lurked on top of our houses. One neighbor was simply sitting in his living room when he began hearing walking above him. It left him paralyzed with fear, and all he could do was sit and stare in horror at the area above him. Another friend who lived 3 houses down was taking out her trash when she heard walking right above her doorway. It left her so scared she ran inside and refused to be out all night for months. But the list goes on with the small stories we've been told. Story 5. My fiance claims she heard someone yelling help from the woods. By WeldForMe. To give some perspective on this scenario, we live in an apartment complex at the edge of a town in Illinois. Right next to us is a woodsy area full of coyotes and deer and lots of birds, so it's pretty lively. Last night, at 3 a.m., she went outside to grab a case of water from the trunk of our car. While she was grabbing it, she claimed she heard someone say, "Hello?" in a girl's voice, coming from the woods. She couldn't see anything, but she replied back, confused. "Hello?" Whatever it was ended up saying, "Can somebody help me?" And that's when she got the chills and ran as fast as she could back inside our house. Right before she entered the house, she said she heard it again, with the voice getting closer, asking for help. But instead of a normal girl's voice, it turned into something unnatural, something unreal, something she couldn't explain. After all was said and done, my fiancé said that the voice sounded familiar, but she just couldn't point out whose voice it belonged to. Why I believe she wasn't bullshitting is because 2 years living here, we've never talked about things like this, and when she rushed inside, she startled me with how shocked she looked and her heavy breathing. She thinks it was a skinwalker, because who would be out at 3 a.m. asking for help in the woods? What do you guys think? Story 6. This person or creature is why I will never open my window at night again. By Evening Most, 2914. This is a true story, and it haunts me every single night. It all started on a Tuesday night around 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm lying alone in bed in the dark, and my window is cracked open. I prefer having a breeze at night to stay cool. It doesn't matter if it's hot or cold or windy or rainy, I will open my window. Anyways, I had to make this post because what happened is really haunting me. To explain, all of a sudden this noise started. I remember my eyes rapidly opening and the shivers being brought down my spine. It was very paralyzing and it made my whole body jolt like a shockwave running through my nerves. This sensation is especially intense at night when you are startled by a noise like your old house settling. But this was unlike anything I've ever experienced. To start, the noise that scared me seemed to be a man shouting from a quarter of a mile away. I thought to myself that this was extremely unusual. I live in a desolate area and I don't have many neighbors around, so it couldn't have been them. I live in a woodsy area in a humble neighborhood. Most people who live here are hermits and don't leave their homes unless it's for bi-weekly grocery shopping or leaving in the morning to go to work. But the screams, they were very specific and were arranged in a pattern. They almost sounded inhuman. A loud but faint yell would sound about every 2 seconds, and the yells were unintelligible words and lasted for about 1 to 2 syllables. It was almost perfect, sounding like a recording of a shout played again and again and again, but for hours. The dreadful sound stayed in place for 3 hours. It was non-stop yelling, and the man never seemed to move locations except for when the noises slowly got farther away, and that's when it seemed to stop. The sounds lasted from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. I assume the man making the disturbance was in his early 30s. It haunts me to think of someone just standing in the forest, blatantly yelling words for 3 hours straight, in the middle of the night. The sounds didn't appear like they were desperate, as if they were in need of any help. The only drastic thing would be if a bear mauled you to death, but no one's stupid enough to go out at night like this. The terrifying shouts were so emotionless. I eventually was able to catch my breath and peek out the window. It wasn't the wind causing the noise, and it most definitely wasn't a branch scraping my window, like someone would try claiming in order to debunk me. But I was too afraid to go outside and investigate. I had to debate whether calling the police would be the right thing to do or not. I kept my ear close to the window for a few minutes, now starting to decrypt what he was saying. It sounded like it was in a different language or a gibberish word being spoken, but it was very strange. I know I'm not crazy and I know what I heard. I'll probably never open my window ever again, since I don't want to find out who or what was making those sounds, and I definitely do not want them to come back. Does anybody know what this could be? I asked my neighbors if they heard, and only 1 out of the 4 claimed they did. We both don't know what it was.